The status quo account of political ordering disavows the culture of fear that undergirds socio-political action. Likewise, the call to resolve this politics of fear with macro-political responses reinstantiates and animates liberalism's political positioning within secular modernity. Embracing the narrative of Christ is an act of being for life, ruptures the socio-political imagery of the modern political liberalism in this debate space in the larger political arena. Therefore, this is Bell in 8. Washington Fear armies mobilized secret integrity facilities are erected, suspended rounded up civil liberties and jurisprudence fall by the wayside, all in pursuit of one overriding concern. Nothing more matters more to me right now than the survival of my homeland. We can, for example, debate the appropriateness of torture and the necessity of curtailing civil rights or proper limitation on presidential war power in the midst of war and terror. But who could challenge the underlying primary motivation to challenge the culture of fears to attack the human emotion, but to assault the foundation of political order that keeps there at bay? Why any alternative culture of fear must address liberalism and fear, the dominated counter-liberalism of the political order designed to diffuse fear or ward off terror. Thus, by the means of construction of complex space, modern political liberalism is revealed to be not about dissipating pre-political fear, but about the production and manipulation of fear. Liberalism is a politics of fear, thus denies liberal political order that can be done when the relief to our fears will be a different order of politics of life. The controversy of politics and announce Christ the truth man that distantiates being for life by any to break a rupture with being for death that simultaneously animates political liberalism. Such a politics stands on pure affirmation without a shadow of negation. The life, fidelity, and truth of endless Christ is indefinite. The crucifixion, suffering, and death thus displaces the way to life. Pure affirmation is resurrected life. And politics in the state don't exist. They merely project only the imagination of the means of false salvation from death. This misplaced faith is a will of power that justifies every form of atrocity. This is Kavanaugh in 3. Politics is the practice of imagination. We are fooled by the solidity of politics and forgetting that these materials are marshaled by the acts of imagination. How does provincial farm boy become persuaded that he must travel as a soldier to another part of the world and kill people he knows nothing about? He must be convinced of the reality of borders and imagine himself united in a wider national community. This, exercising a different kind of political imagination rooted in the Christian story of the modern states built on the soteriology of rescue from violence. To see this is the false soteriology, open the doors of reimagination. The state in space and time alone, the true theological lines. This state as such does not exist. What exists are buildings and border patrols. What mobilizes the project into a nation state is discipline imaginary as the community of political imagination is simply the condition of possibility for the organized bodies in a society. And modernity secular is overdetermined how we begin to know and exist within the world. You should instead utilize radical orthodoxy as a lens to view the debate community, the topic of the world as a means of reclaiming the situation in the world within a theological framework. This is Milbank Ward and Pickstock in 98. Secular modernity exhibiting anxiety concerning its own lack of multiple promotes materialism, soulless, aggravating, and nihilistic reclaim the world by situation and concerns activities within a theological framework. Secularism has invested heavily aesthetics, politics, sex, the body, personhood, visibility, space, race, accentuates them from the Christian standpoint. That is, in terms of the Trinity, Christology, and the Church and the Eucharist, a theological project does not seek in the face of drift up short of universal accounts of the immanent human value in the face of the secular devising the truth that seeks to reconfigure the theological truth. The theological approach may be placed under the rubric of radical orthodoxy or orthodox in the most straightforward sense of the commitment to the credo of Christ and the exemplary artistic matrix. Radical in the sense of the return of the patriotic and medieval roots in the especially the Augustinian version of knowledge and the divine illumination, a notion which transcends modern race. Those are dualism of faith and reason and grace and nature. Radical. Second, in the seeking to deploy the recovered vision systematically to criticize modern society, culture, politics, art, science, and philosophy in the unprecedented boldness. Radical in the third sense, realizing that via such engagements we do have to rethink this tradition. And therefore, Alex and I embrace Austin and I embrace a radically orthodox interpretation of the narrative of Christ and read the discussion of the topic. And embracing the politics of being for life ruptures socio-political imagery, the emancipatory politics of hope offered in a culture of fear. This is Bell in the city God established politics unoriented by fear, death, sustained by violent domination. The city God animated by politics of resurrection, love that exceeds the boundaries of time and space, the emphasis to share the communion of all love. This cease to the motivated states at the risk of all fear, losing nothing for the sake of breaking down the dividing walls of hostility. This gift of resurrected life is our political hope in the midst of a world in which a war without end world, where we discover there is no end of fear in the world that Christ enters the truth and the rupture of the culture of fear and politics of death of the gospel of life, and the desire to belong to scholastic tradition of thought is a method of faith whose system is a method of ontological inscription on those who face an intimate dialogue with those through the system. Therefore, faith's appropriation of our unique subjectivities make us a final realization of those systems. As such, this is Hemming in 98. Scholasticism included by being the way of speaking God. Nihilism is the way of speaking death, also speaking the being race. The question of how we might speak faithfully of being God has to do with how truth and time without faithfulness is so. Not because I attempt to bring myself in the conceived tradition of body, but without a correspondence of myself what is true, carried out in an act of will and its repetition in which therefore it is always looking backwards into what has gone, and it is a determination of mine is being faithful. Rather, I belong to the tradition, something which lies ahead of me, something which outside of me, which I am for in the sense lie in the constitutive sense of the tradition, being in intimate dialogue with I am the potential horizon of being made as actual realization. Faith in God and Christianity makes the real within the horizon of my eye, which in the faith of God makes the horizon that God has made so express my being appropriate in the Christian tradition can be understood as what forms me as a faithful person. And Secular consumption, ethical lead to moral relativism, and render ethics fundamentally unknowable. Only a fixed starting point founded with the narrative Christ is able to effectuate pragmatic changes. Macintosh, in 12, any ethical system must answer the question of how we know good. Christian ethics is concerned with an interpretation of God, grounding in God's self-interpretation. The moral agent does not interpret what is good, but interpreted by the good with God actions. Defining this part, developed ethics in a theological presupposition about the nature of reality, grounded in a Trinitarian account of God. His concern is to avoid the ethical truths being derived from the source outside the divine revelation to encounter standard in Christ. God's self-giving love in Jesus Christ defines moral agent in the relation of divine command. In the act of revelation in Jesus Christ, is the possibility of acknowledging the God from the side of ethical agent that is exclusively actualized. First question, Christian ethics is not what is good or what we ought to do, but who we are in light of the account of who God is. Every action, regardless of whether or not God is acknowledged under divine command, is not with the theory of the relationship between currently and created being, but the theory of the divine praxis and consideration of executing ethics must deal. Cut the card at deal. And status quo debate is death culture. This is Pavanelli in 85. Debate is catastrophe begins and ends with calamity on a global scale. Winning debate events has become a thermonuclear holocaust or a blood slide into planetary eco-disaster. The focus on the activity has been overwhelmed by discussion of disaster on the lost touch of the real world. Rarely does a judge decide the best way to obtain a sound policy by voting for the team that carries the least risk of triggering apocalypse. No decision is made in a vacuum. Debaters remain in the lead isolated activity instead of deciding what should be done to debates decide what not to do. Some throw up their hands in despair right off this dispute as a non-resolvable clash of philosophy, offer a different strategy replies. And only pure affirmation of Christ provides the possibility of politics beyond fear and death. Politics of being for life reveals death as a non-existent void that suffering is nothing as temporal experience. These focal points only serve to reanimate violence and negation as such. As Bell in for John, we are told the perfect love because of fear and Palmer writes the church and almost a mocking tone the death has been swallowed up blessing. Here we see the signposts of politics beyond fear and death for politics of life. Pure affirmation Christ's work does not find the center of death is focused on the cross, but in life resurrected Christ work of atonement being for life, now that negation, submitting to negation and overcoming negation with an act of negation, rather Christ saying that not so he must die, but so that we might live. Christ's work of atonement is the labor of sheer affirmation. Christ is a break with his right side, him smother side. The resurrection is not the conditional possibility. There's a disjunction between death and resurrection. Resurrection does not answer or even defeat death. Both move the dialectical negation that reify what they purport to overcoming the resurrection. We are simply the negation of death, and Lazarus would be a resurrected corpse would be our hope. As the interpretation of the sight of death, resurrected Christ does not merely defeat death or tame it or subdue it at all of which resume a relation to death. Such presumption relies on death and being towards death. It grants that something to reality, hence a permanent that elapsed. Scripture speaks of death being destroyed and death being no more. The offer that a resurrected life unmasked, being toward death and absence of power. A void of nothing being for life is indifferent to death because death, precisely as nothing, is nothing that cannot be taken into account as nothing. Death cannot make a difference to the redeemed. There is no obstacle, nothing at all. Thus no longer concerns us, nor is it to be feared. The cross of the last futile after death negation, but God also refuses to accept negation. God actually refuses nothing. Conversely, there's nothing in our refusal for God to accept Jesus is the gift of God's redemption, not because he endures divine negation in our stead, but because he embodies the divine refusal to negate humanity in it. Sin or refusal that endures even to the point of death on the cross is this divine refusal that nevertheless pure affirmation as the resurrected one seems to crucify him with also like offer of life, similarly, just as Christ's labor as for affirmation reveals death to be nothing, we now see that suffering is nothing to what is the divine redemption of Christ's labor and the fidelity of life, his refusal to depart from the divine mission by repealing the offer of life in the face of suffering. In life is that is ours, and Christ's suffering is unmasked, it's nothing, hence a supernatural calmness on the display of the martyrs. What is so remarkable about the martyrs is not their death, but their unflinching refusal to surrender their witness to the divine affirmation of life as the act of God creation, ex nihilo. Consequently, what suffering there is revealed to be the contingent effect of sin. Suffering is contingent historical consequences, sin and rebellion, and now the redemptive part of God is only temporal, temporary, passing, and finally nothing. There is no radical evil who with effects threatening peaceful analogy of life. That one fixes suffering in crucifixion points not to the necessity of suffering in the past redemption, but the stubborn persistence of sin, refusal, affirmation, the brutal resilience, and the culture of fear, death, and the producing both cross and executioners. What are executioners?
What is a narrative?
I mean, I guess what we'll define a narrative as is write a story.
Write a story. You said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. What are you saying?
Oh, sure. So we're saying that the narrative of Christ.
I'm just asking, what is a narrative?
Oh, sure. So we'll go with a story that has
a story. So what part of the 1AC is a story about Jesus Christ?
Yeah, like we don't read the
so
narrative.
Then how are you a narrative of Jesus Christ?
Well, I'm not saying that I'm a narrative of Christ, right?
Your Macintosh evidence specifically says the only way to solve for pragmatic change is through a narrative of Christ. How do you lead to, or what pragmatic change do you lead to?
We say embracing a narrative of Christ, right? We don't.
So how do you embrace a narrative? How do you embrace the narrative of Jesus Christ?
Sure. So our first piece of Bell evidence indicates that when looking at the narrative of Christ, right, we see that there is no such thing as death. If you want us to read one because you don't know, we can do that. We sort of, assume that most people know at least of the general narrative of Christ. What we're saying is that the narrative of Christ in his resurrection means that there is no such thing as death, right? We don't defend that as like a historically accurate truth.
Okay.
We just think that
That's cool.
that-
But you say the narrative of Christ is an act of the being for life. What do you mean by being for life?
Sure. So when we say being for life, we say there's obviously two metaphysical institutions in the idea of quote unquote life, right? We say that there's life and death. We think that being for death or focusing on death is problematic. Rather, we should only affirm life, right? So we say that we should affirm life in every sense.
Okay. Who is Jesus?
I don't know.
You don't know who. I'm just who's Jesus Christ?
Sure. So in terms of history, right? He was a person who came and was crucified by the Romans, right? In terms of the narrative, we think that he was someone who died and was resurrected.
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so your advocacy is an interpretation of the narrative of Christ en route to a discussion of the topic. When has Jesus ever intervened into institutions or politics?
I don't think that we're saying that Jesus has, right? Because again, we're not defending him as a
But if
historically
you-
accurate character. But what we're
Okay,
saying,
but if you endorse his interpretation or his narrative as en route into politics, how does Jesus?
yeah, best
work in
pragmatic example is
politics?
probably the early Roman Church, right? What they did was they embraced the narrative of Christ, right? They did not think that they were Christ or think that Christ specifically intervened in politics. But the political actions that they took were what showed their embracement of the narrative of Christ, right? Roman soldiers came to persecute them and
Okay.
decided to kill
That's
them.
fine. I have one last question. What is the state?
We think the state's like the institutions around us, right? The DMV, things like that, the president, presidential war powers. We think that those are all instances of the state that we think are only real insofar as we grant them their credence.
It should be one.